just move right into Pupil Services and Special Education Committee meeting. So I will call that to order. Our members, JP Prego is here, but Mike Elliott is in Disney. Let's all boo Mike real quick. Just kidding, Mike.
Speak for yourself.
We hope he's having a good time and comes back with a good report for us. So first, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the January 24, 2022 minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Dana, any questions?
No.
No? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so next we're going to talk about pathway to graduation. We're going to get an update on that. Hopefully you, actually you weren't on the committee last year.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'll back it up. That's
yeah,
all.
well, like,
Just an overview.
P2G stands for Path to Graduation, Pathway to Graduation, I think it's technically what it's called, Pathway to Graduation. And we are doing that in conjunction with the MCIU, correct?
Yeah, so we're doing that. So I'll sort of, it's Patan and Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. So I'll sort of back up a little bit because I know that some of you may not have participated. So P2G, or Path to Graduation, it's a grant. They came to us, they talked with us about it. Obviously, we jumped on board. The overarching goal here, really, if you look at here, and it started September. So it's a 2-year grant. And it's really, the goal is path to graduation. So if you look at and think about kids graduating, kids who struggle, does it, like research will tell you, it doesn't start in high school. So hence, that's why this is starting in middle school. So the grant here, working with them, it's very specific. It's 2 years. And what it looks like is really looking at supports for kids that need that extra support, mentoring, all of those things. So the IU, they're looking directly at specific kids. It's students in middle school with an emotional disturbance. Now, that's typically, it's all of our kids in the middle school that are in the ES program.
Am I on the right side?
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
I think I was on the wrong side. Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so basically what it's looking at, if you take a look up here, it's overarching. We want to improve the graduation rate. We want to, decrease or lower the dropout rate. Ensuring students do graduate from high school on top of being college and or, career ready. It addresses 3 main areas. Talks about the academic piece, social emotional, and then the behavioral. So again, this actual program now, they're taking data on just those students that have an emotional disturbance, disability. Not all of our students in the ES program have that type of disability. So they're only taking data on those kids, but we have added in, there's a couple of other kids in that program with a different disability. They're still participating, and we're taking that data for them. So the overarching goal, and you'll see at the very bottom there, what it really is. So these are the 3 areas it looks at. It helps to decrease some of those risk factors as for the dropout rate. These looking to improve attendance for these kids, decreasing any, ODRs or office discipline referrals, as well as course performance and how they're doing. That bottom point, I think, is Upper Kirk's main goal. Transition to, and it's all in caps, all middle school students and all high school students to develop this program, the Path to Graduation. So our current kids at the middle school participating are in 6th and 7th grade. These kids are going to go to high school. So if we're going to develop this program, we want it to continue as they get older. And I think we do have that added as well in the comp plan. Oh, I'm pushing mine. So this is what it looked like at the beginning. The beginning of this school year, there was a lot of pre-planning, working with the IU, and then working with Patan for this. We had to identify team members. our core team members here, and that really is, I'll just give you, I have a member here sitting to my left. Sarah's participating in the core team, and then we also have another individual, and he's included, he's a parent in the district, and there's an ulterior motive to that. It's Rob Carpenter. So, as we transition this eventually, hopefully, into the high school, Rob has familiarity. So, other core team members, we call them internal coaches. We have two. So one of them is our behavior specialist, and then we have the emotional support teacher, which has been a bit of a transition this year, but we have somebody consistently in there and working, and I think it was a great idea that we have two internal coaches because it's a lot on there. We also have a liaison. That's the individual we have chosen, and it is Kate Harmon, who is a student assistant counselor. And she's really added support with the family, with the community, to provide that extra information or supports for them. And then we have special education teachers, we have general education teachers, and they're all on the core team. So we meet monthly with our team. And what happens during that monthly meeting with the IU and with Patan, we literally, we talked about, and there was some professional development for the core team there, the early warning system. And what is that? What does that mean? Those three specific areas. So right now we have 8 students specifically where we're taking the data on in the program. We are looking at monthly each of their daily attendance, their behavior infractions, and then their course performance. And it's really looking at the core subject areas. So if you look at that little bottom on the left, the ABCs, that's exactly what it is. So the attendance, and if you can see it, it talks about some of the research, what it does say in the areas of kids that have behavior difficulties, failing courses, things like that, and the ability for them, or the more likelihood that they're going to graduate in 4 years with their cohort on time and move on. So this is working to support these areas, and we just call it the ABCs. So every month when we meet, every one of those students, we pull up. So it's a nice little system that they have, and a lot of those 3 areas can be pulled right out of our information system. So every month we look at those 8 kids. The month before when we met is somebody like their grades decreasing in certain areas, behavior infractions, attendance. And as a team, we look at that and communicate about that. So this is some of the professional development that to date has occurred for P to J. So the entire core team went through, what is the early warning system, learning about that, and then what we can do with that. The internal coaches, they go through training. So far they've done October, December. I think there's another one that they will go to. And then Kate Harmon, she's gone through 2 trainings. Brian Callen and myself we've gone through 2 trainings now as well, and it's a 2-year training. I will tell you, I have found that really beneficial because that's run by the IU and with Patan, with every other administrator participating in this. So half of those people are in their 2nd year. So that's great, I think, for people like us, other schools. And we actually have a good few neighboring districts that's been really nice. Like Palisades is in their 2nd year. So some of those things are nice. You learn a lot. There's a lot of breakout rooms. And then what is Check and Connect? So I shared with you 2 of the booklets that all of our core team members and our current members or mentors have. As we said, our goal is to move this to any students at the middle school, not just our ES students. Because we all know whether you're a special ed student or a gen ed student, things may start to happen or creep up. This is considered along the lines of a tier 3 intervention. So when we really look to spread this out, it's going to be looking at any of those kids in those areas, and then this could be considered to get involved with the Check and Connect. As of February, as of right now, there's 10 district mentors that have been trained. So that training was the January 28th, and that was run by the IU support that we have there. So Brian and myself, and then the 8 individuals who have agreed to become a mentor to 1 student. So we went through the full training. What does this look like? So what in the world is Check and Connect? For lack of a better word, and you can sort of look at some of the things up there, these people are your go-to people. Your trusted, confidant. You know, if Sarah is my mentor, I know Andrea might be the teacher, for example, and I'm just really angry, I'm agitated. You know, 24/7, that is my trusted person. I can go to them, we can find time together to meet. It's really that support. Initially what that looks like, and I'll get into that in another slide because it's really going to kick off starting tomorrow, and I'll tell you about that. But so every individual or mentor will have a student that they would work directly with. It's very individualized, it's very data-driven, and as time goes on, the goal with the mentor and the student, as they begin the initial phases, just develop a relationship, a positive one. These are the 4 components, and you can sort of see in that little picture there as well. The mentor working directly, and notice, which is very positive, it's not just students, it's the family as well, or the parents and the communication. The check, there's regular checks, utilizing the school data. So as we said, we talked about when we have our monthly core team meetings, we look at the attendance, we look at the behavior, all those things. They're that person that eventually the goal is, I know that Sarah can come to me and be like, Carol, what is going on? You have missed the last 7 days out of 10 in school. You know, so, but it's more of a support for that. Connect, really looking to do some interventions to support, maintain their connection to the school environment, and then engagement with families. So I think a large part of this are kids that will actually participate in this. We do have a permission form. Parents will be aware of it. They'll get more information on that. And the hope is that the mentor and the student, the mentor will communicate and collaborate with the parent. Maybe just updates, maybe some things. And again, every mentor and student may have a little bit of a different relationship, and the same may go for parents. So you do as much as you can. The goal is to support, but it's to do this. Because I have always found in special education, for example, if we don't do this and work together, it makes life very difficult for the child, I think, to make the growth and progress. So, any questions with that? Yep.
So you're currently working with your students who are identified as emotional support students in the middle school, and you said the goal is to eventually branch that out. Will this be something that will work with your current SAP team? Like, if you have a SAP team case manager who thinks that one of their students would benefit from P2G, will they be able to refer them to you? Is that kind of how that will work? Or how will students eventually be identified, I guess?
Yeah, so I do
It's
think...
much better now that I think that's how to phrase the question.
Yeah, so it absolutely can. So part of that MTSS or the child study team with these kids will be, as I mentioned, something along the lines of a tier 3 intervention. So this is how all things can connect. And mind you, if you think of some of the core team members, Brian Cowan, assistant principal, very important, like when you're talking about SAP and things like that. Kate Harmon, our student assistant counselor. So the goal is that everything will work and support each other. On top of this, it could be, and maybe something else had occurred, where there is a SAT referral. So things can, again, the connection is for everything to be together.
So, but eventually could like a teacher just come to one of these mentors and say, I have a student that I'd like to refer to the P2G?
Yeah, so that's really great. So as part of this, and I think as our child study team, if you looked at the areas they will address, mainly it's the behavior, it's the course performance, and it's the attendance. So if you think of what MTSS does, this is it. So if a teacher were to come to Brian Callen and say, you know, Mary is not, she's been absent, here's her absent, which would potentially could lead to a student, you know, a SAFE or for attendance improvement. But it could also, for course performance, that is part of the MTSS, what has been implemented, all of those things. So it can, and then the social emotional behavior is a piece of that too. So 100% it could lead to it, which is, as we said, this is like a tier 3. But remember, we wouldn't get to a tier 3, we do the core and that, all of that, and then maybe a student for some reason or the data leads them into a tier 2. So yes, to answer your question, it clearly can, but it's along the similar process for kids that may have math or reading needs, and how do they get to that if they need that tier 2 or tier 3. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
So I was just curious, like, how are the mentors chosen and what's like the process? What does that look like for them to get matched up with somebody?
Yeah, so as a core team, so there are a few of our mentors that are actually also core team members, but not all of them. So when we came up with, we identified the core team, which was in July and August, so before the school year even started, communicated with these individuals, shared information a little bit more about the program. Are you potentially interested in all of this? So that was the first step. Every core team member, there's about 10 of us, I think, Sarah? Is that
Yeah.
About 10 of us, all agreed, everybody was highly interested in it. So we started with them. And then, as we got into September and learned about what some of these things are and what is a mentor, what do they do, Carol Giblin, does not know every staff member there, and there are a ton of individuals that this is exactly what they would love, those things. So as a core team, individuals were recommended and everybody else on that core team, other than Rob and Sarah and me, all work at the middle school. So there were recommendations for certain individuals, and then following that, went to those individuals, are you interested potentially? And then we held a meeting for anybody that came back and shared that they weren't interested. So Brian and I led a meeting, I'm going to go end of November, December, and we held a meeting. We shared a lot of information at the middle school. What does this entail? What it looks like? What it would mean to you? Your added time for this? And those individuals agreed, and so moved forward. And then hence the next step was to get trained as a mentor, and that was what occurred in January. Someone may find a month from now or 2 months from now, and that's okay. If it's really not what they thought it would be, it's okay. And then we move forward. So to support that, though, what do we do with the child that they worked with? Well, we already put that in place. So we have what we call a 1A mentor and a 1B mentor. So every mentor is currently, the 1A is the mentor for the student. However, if things happen, if they need some additional supports or things were going to happen, the 1B individual is the person that can jump in. They can work together. They both know that this is their particular student, but the 1A individual is really the one, the go-to. And everybody is aware of who the individuals are, and to support that. So, and of course other things can happen as well, but we've tried to look to sort of support that.
Okay, thanks.
Upcoming Check and Connect events. So tomorrow, February 18th, is our big kickoff event at 8 o'clock in the morning. And this is really, we're going to bring the kids in. The mentors will be there. We're doing it at the middle school, very stress-free, a little bit of breakfast treats, some little activities. And then we're going to share with them, though, in a 6th or 7th grade terms of what, potentially we're looking to do to help and support them sort of moving forward. And then the remainder of that time, they're going to just really get to know their mentor. It's going to be, again, it's not going to be one-on-one. We don't want this to be stressful for kids or for the adults because they may not know them, some of the kids. So this is just really that first time. And then what we've really looked at, because I think our goal, and really talking with our IU and Patan, if we really want this to sustain, we can't rush it. And I don't think we have. I think we're moving in a good, timely. But the next month, no data, no anything from the mentor on the student. The only thing we're asking them to do, get to know the student. Spend time with them, start to develop a relationship, that's it. Then on our end, the next month, then we'll look at it, we'll come back. One thing I did just see today, because We do have a permission form, we have an introductory letter, et cetera. What I have seen, so we make some adjustments and we will. So really starting probably bi-weekly, I will probably, because like I said, our core team members and our mentors aren't all the same people. And I think our mentors need that, so I'm sort of the mentor coordinator. And so I'm gonna sort of place myself intentionally for this. The mentors will know that, like bi-weekly for like an hour where literally, and I'm there at the end of the day. I know everybody has different schedules, but like when those questions come up or those things, and they also know that they can go to the people right there at the building. And so as a core team, we can sort of work through some of those questions or issues. So the permission form is actually going home tomorrow with the kids. And one of those areas that we're sort of tweaking right now, the introductory letter will go home to the parents to give more information next week. We're going to meet with our teacher, the mentors again, just to delve into a few things to make sure everything is clear. And then we'll send that letter home as well.
Did you have anybody, so obviously these kids know that they're going to be involved in this program.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Tomorrow.
Oh, so you're springing it on.
Well, yeah, so, yeah, like I said, tomorrow, it's really like the terminology and things like that. That's not the goal tomorrow. It's really just to, and then to have this stress-free little activity period for these kids, so it's just an opening of the door. And this, and my thing is like, well, wait a minute, how did we not do these things first? Well, I've come to understand through the people in their second year that I'm working with the IU and Patan, this is typically how they would follow that process and do that. But then it would be, because there's nothing occurring tomorrow other than getting to know an individual. They're not going to be introduced like, Mrs. Martinez, who's our school psychologist, one of the mentors. We're not going to literally be introducing her, so-and-so, here is your mentor. It's going to be a lot less stressful or not more as very intense. Just really people, I said, like tomorrow, getting to know each other. And then the follow-up with the parents. And then obviously, like I will say, just because it was a special education meeting, I happened to meet or be with two of the parents earlier this week. That was a great opportunity. I took 10 minutes. We talked about it, and they were literally like, so I'm hoping, but again, if anybody does not want their child to participate, that's fine too. So we'll just kind of go with that. So to sort of wrap this up, next steps where we are, continue with our core team meetings, continue professional development for administrators. So it's very well planned out throughout the entire year. We already know when the next professional development is and for who. Literally it came up at our core team meeting, which was just on Wednesday of this week, and our IU support literally said to me, so Carol, when are we going to, train more mentors? And I was like, and I agree with him, but I also know at the middle school, and it's not been the easiest of years for everybody, so, he knows it too. Like, we just need to go maybe even a little bit slower.
It's one step at a time, no.
Yeah, and especially if the goal is to sustain this, where these kids have this for the next 2 years, and then they get to high school, and we can look to get people trained and do things like that. And again, it is added on the comp plan as well, the P to J. And then check and connect implementation, which is really, hopefully over this next month. In April, there are some surveys, and this is part of what the IU as well as Patan and their data gathering on this. And then year 2 implementations next year. Any questions or anything?
Any board members have any questions?
This is geared just for education professionals, right?
So, great question. I should have mentioned that to you. Actually, one of our mentors is the guidance administrative assistant at the middle school. So she's, as far as being a teacher, she's not a teacher. No, it's not. It does not have to be. She's assigned a mentor with a student. She knows just basically in her location and seeing kids coming and going. She was interested. We were thrilled. We have the other individuals are our school psychologist, like I said, our student assistance counselor, We have at least 2, I think, special education teachers, some gen ed teachers. Is that what you mean? Or are you talking about other people outside of the
I was
building?
involved in a mentor program. Once a week, I would go up to the middle school, and I was assigned a student and sat with them for a half hour. And,
Are you saying that you're potentially interested in it?
I just wondered if there's the potential,
I think I
if the program grows,
I saw the thing.
to incorporate people outside the education.
I think that could be potentially, sort of maybe a next step over this. Again, we're 5-6 months in, but I think that is a very interesting, thought. And especially when you get more into that high school area or age as well, just because of the, move them to graduation and things like that.
Does our public have any questions?
No, I don't.
We are going to move on then to the comprehensive plan goal update. This probably won't be terribly long.
No, in fact, I'm going to, give you the abridged version, because it is out there and we've talked about it. But as many of you know, August 31st is our next round of comprehensive planning. As a committee, if you're a part of it, or you recall, we are keeping our mission and our vision statements. We have looked at the goals and rewritten them to be 2 large goals. And so really, some of it will look similar because that work, honestly, is consistent. 5 years is never going to be enough time to do the work. The product of the work that was in the last comprehensive plan was what was on display, by and large, in our previous meeting. But really, we're really talking about K-12 programming, benchmarking across academics, behavior, social skills, and then making sure that we have the right resources, training, personnel in order to continue to meet that vision and that mission that we set out as a district. One of the facets or the focus areas that came out from all of the work that we gathered from our stakeholders was social emotional learning. K-12 is consistently something that people feel that we need to continue to focus on, as well as engaging kids and engaging their families in social emotional learning and self-care. We have heard from our students and our staff and our stakeholders, self-care is something that post-COVID or even on the tail end of COVID, we're going to have to commit to in the long term, if not forever, because, our mental health is important in the school world. And so we should continue to focus on that. When we think about that, we are looking at continuing our SEL programming as a tier 1 for everyone. We also need to continue to look at mental health screeners, risk assessment tools through the Pupil Service Department. Those are 2 different things. Risk assessment tools are really about self-harm, where mental health screeners are, ACEs-based, adverse childhood experiences, and not necessarily if you had an adverse experience, will you not perform well in school, but you become susceptible to other situations, and especially if it's rooted in trauma. So that will be the recommendation that the Pupil Service team continues to work on. Staff development through SEL is embedded through the life of the comprehensive plan. Some of what you also heard here from Mrs. Best was that those options are driven out of teacher recommendation, staff recommendation, in the arena of mental health and supporting kids from diverse backgrounds and experiences. And then our service delivery model. So again, do we have the right people supporting kids K-12? And so that is something that we'll continue to work on. Focus area 2 in this goal is how do we better engage our kids in our community in student wellness? And there were a lot of ideas that were saturated around that topic. Some fun things like a community 5K. How do we engage all of those people who we know are doing great work in the Upper Perkiomen Valley and join forces with them? And then how do we best communicate what we are offering? Many of us know through committee meetings here, the work is here. It may not be people hearing about it. And so that's something that came up. Oh, let me close this so you don't see that. The second large umbrella goal is programming, to prepare kids for career, college, meaningful participation in their community through supported transitions between school buildings, career exploration, job skill development, and continued secondary transition programming. This was a big bucket that was oversimplified in the focus areas, in that we're talking about K-12 core programs and then K-12 supplemental programs and activities. So we're drawing a very clear line that it's the difference between what we do in the classroom and what we do in the district, if that makes sense. And so there were many ideas that were brainstormed, but the focus is really pathways to graduation. And I know that seems ironic, because why are we talking about graduation necessarily in elementary school? But it's honoring the regard that not every kid may be proficient on the Keystone, but every kid has a pathway to graduation. And so those look very different depending on what your interests are, what you choose to study, if you're a vocational student. Those types of experiences are honored for kids in the new pathway models in Act 158. And the expansion of our secondary special education transition program. And if you think about it, that program has grown enormously since its inception back in 17-18. And the great work that team has done over time is honestly renowned in our county. I mean, people ask about our transition program often. What we have experienced is that there are very different levels of transition in those students based on the complexity of their needs. And so a one-size-fits-all transition program is not really servicing all of the kids who are accessing that program. Now, we also have the caveat that there's some learning support students who may need very unique pathway experiences to obtain graduation. And we can't have all of those kids in Shane's program. And so, I'm sure he would love them. He just doesn't have the time. And what they need looks very different. And so, apprenticeship, job mentorship, those types of things for our learning support population who may not be proficient even through a composite score on the Keystones, we have looked at those alternative pathways, what is available for those students, because they are potentially at the most risk. So you hear about P2G, let's get them there. Let's make sure we have the right supports to make sure they graduate when they get to high school. Some of that is also the conversation about the revision of our gifted programming, K through 12, that was in there. And so, there's a lot of work, including supplemental activities, that support kids. The integration of work-based skills and executive functioning was part of the focus in there. How do we raise kids' sort of metacognition about what those skills are, what they bring to the table in terms of strength, and then what might they need a little instruction on in order to get them ready for transition. And so I think these are very big, broad, but we did not talk about this. We talked about it at our board retreat, but we haven't talked about it necessarily outside of the steering committee. Where this is at right now is we are still continuing to map out those frameworks that were shared, and they will be shared publicly, on what our action steps are over time. There is a ton of work embedded in those intentionally. And so, things like responsive classroom restorative practices, things, that require TLS integration, considerations for MTSS and looking at those screeners. So we are continuing to work with those subgroups, relative to the focus area in order to make sure what we present to the board later this spring is that plan over time. Because what we know is that once it's approved, we we do ask for support, fiscal support of those recommendations, whether it be in the form of personnel or training, which is also expensive. And so that is the work that we're doing right now. Kim and I are beginning the arduous process of putting it in the state platform, which they make really super easy and fun. Our May 12th board presentation, we gave ourselves lots of time. As is always the case, it has to sit out for public review and comment. I can tell you what will sit out for public review and comment is now this will go up. You will, our community will see this. They'll see some of those action steps in goal 1 and 2. They won't be able to write in the document, but they'll be able to see it. And then, my hope is that it does bring about interest or comment or inquiry. And then June 16th would be the formal board approval for submission to the state by August 31st.
Is there anything you need from us, the board? Besides when you come with the plan, we talked about the fiscal, we have to pay for all this. Is right now in this, this arduous part here, is there anything the board can do to support you at this time?
No, I think that the process has been very inclusive of lots of folks. I think our board retreat offered us time to discuss it. We continue to encourage any feedback or questions. There is no doubt some of the things that are embedded in these plans are what come to the forefront at board meetings. And I always say I would rather you have an affirmative response that's what's in our comprehensive plan. So if there are any questions about what's in there, that's open and honest discourse about what that means. And, that would be continued dialogue. It should not look like a surprise to you in May. It should look and reflect our previous discussions. And so, I don't want any board member or any community member to feel like we were not transparent in the process. That ultimately is our goal, I think. But unless you know a really good data entry person.
Mr. Prego, Mr. Hitzer, either of you have any questions regarding this? No?
I don't.
Okay. Public?
I also like just waiting for it out to see, but just curious, you did mention the revised gifted program for K-12, and I'm just kind of curious what that looks like, although it doesn't really matter much anymore for me, but just kind of curious what that looks like because it has pretty much been non-existent for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's, so there's several components. One is structural. I think that the addition of 4-5 presents a logistical nightmare for a single gifted teacher.
Yeah.
Servicing, and while our population may not be extensive elementary, they do need instruction. And so we've also gone through a redefinition of structure multiple times at the middle school and the high school. And so right now we're working with Patrice Simicek, who works as our gifted rep for the region, to try and talk about what is the most effective programming. Obviously she's got significant concerns about service delivery, elementary, 1 teacher, 3 buildings. It's not physically possible for Holly, truthfully. So
Holly's good. She's not that.
she's great. Some of it is the unearthing of the honors conversation in other subject areas. As many people know, if you've been in Upper Perth for a long time, things come and go. Things like honor science came and went. Things like humanities came and went. And so right now, Vince, Dr. Calapietro, and Mrs. Francisco, myself, Carol, Kim and Sarah, when we engage them, some of it is legal related, are really trying to nail down what the best format is. several years ago at the high school, there weren't as many AP courses. And so with the increase in AP, what does service delivery need to look like? And, seminar changed from humanities to STEM. And so we're trying to structurally and instructionally make sure that kids are getting what they need. We, of course, will need to survey families. I think, and it's fair and to be honest and transparent, we have elementary families whose kids are eligible who don't participate because there's not much. Not at the fault of the teacher, it's at the fault of how we structured it in full transparency. So those are all the types of things that we are currently talking about and planning on talking about further. Some of the other things are like access to dual enrollment, college courses, in the framework of the school year and then over the summer, and are those credited and do they factor into the GPA, not for class learning, but for college enrollment? All of those things the gifted teachers are bringing to fruition in our initial discussions.
Good question. All right. Any other questions? No? All right. So this last one was actually added to the agenda at my request. I don't know if you remember our last special ed meeting. Might not have even caught your ears, but it caught mine when Dr. Farina mentioned that we've had a significant increase in our number of homeless students that we service. And I said, well, I know that there's requirements that the district has to follow under McKinney-Vento, but I have no idea what they are. So I asked her to give us a short little presentation so that we know what our responsibilities are and do they need any additional help from the board to support these students. So this is
all right. So I'm going to be I'm going to give you the full disclosure, preface to this. So homeless and foster came to me when so in order to gain a counselor, we lost a social worker. But the social work responsibilities don't go away because of this. So this is the job I do that I'm like, oh, I wish I could spend more time. But so McKinney-Vento is legislation. It is a requirement by all school districts. My hope here is to just give you a picture of what is the relationship, why is it so important that we're talking about students who experience homelessness, what are the dynamics, what is the definition, and then give you like an example of the kinds of things. Our homeless and foster population has doubled. And so the first week of school, and some of you who have offices close to me heard me, they're required meetings and things like that. I had 8 in 1 week. That's unlike it. And then Carol had 5 come in, I think, in 1 week. So it was like, boom. And that's because of the economic downturn and people's family experiences over COVID. So really, obviously homelessness in the concept presents a lot of challenges. Generally, kids who experience homelessness, they don't meet any kind of requirement. They move around and are transient. We see them being hungry, fatigued, very stressed. We already know in the district, based on our PA climate and PACE data, that food availability is something a lot of our community experiences. But our homeless population is even more fragile in their access to food, which then subsequently impacts, just their alertness and readiness for school. They don't have, generally a place where they can go and be, they can't go to their room or go to the dining room. Transportation is a huge factor in the area of homelessness. It's probably the one that Carol and I spend the most time, and Jen Malone, trying to work out for kids. And if you have heard anything, our transportation and busing situation across the country is also limited. So that, because of COVID, added a whole layer for our homeless youth that we did not even anticipate. We also struggle in a lot of arenas because, sadly, in a lot of unaccompanied homeless situations, there is not any adult that is willing to take responsibility for these children. And so, you know, Carol and I in our work spend a lot of time trying to ask questions like, who do we talk to? Who can we call? You know, when there's an educational decision. It is a sad situation looking at children, and their answer is no one. So, you know, those are kind of the barriers that homelessness creates for our population. We also see those barriers sort of spilling into what their day and what their years in school look like. Absenteeism, truancy is through the roof for homeless kids. No doubt, because there is generally nobody who wants to take responsibility for these children. Their academic performance is generally lower than our population, not in all cases. We see, Carol and I work together because our foster and homeless population are almost always also special education students. From across the continuum of needs, but almost always in every case, we both are at the table because of the nature of needs that they have. Their state assessment performance, their graduation likelihood is minimal, and the dropout rate for a homeless student is skyrockets. And so, you know, they are linked. When a child is experiencing homelessness, they're also concurrently experience academic distress and school struggle. Behavior is also usually in there in some way. So, you know, what we know is that education has value. And so this takes the forefront, and there was a revision in the law because, you know, we know education is sort of the key. It's the key to owning a home. It's the key to getting a job. It's the key to everything in order to stop the cycle of homelessness. And so high school graduation is associated with a lot of positive life impacts. You know, decreased unemployment, decreased criminal justice involvement, increased health and welfare, and increased lifespan. And so they've tied that need and those barriers to the value of education, which is graduation equals a higher quality of life, and an end of cyclic poverty. And so, you know, I think that's really important, you know, because people are like, well, we can't fix that. But if we know what the value of homelessness is and education is, that's why it's so important. That's why we spend a ton of time on it. So, I mean, these are just some statistics about subgroups. You know, 346% of youth with less than a high school diploma or GED. So that's the subgroup that we're talking about. 162% reporting an annual household income of less than $24,000. Our Black and African American youth are 83% higher risk. I will tell you the most increased population of students experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ plus students. Disenfranchisement from their families, you know, lack of familial support. It is, and then this is the skyrocketing population of homeless students. You know, obviously unmarried, pregnant youth, and Hispanic non-white youth. So some of the national data, you know, we're looking at, you know, 1.4 million homeless children and youth in the 18-19 school year. 125,000 unaccompanied youth, which means unaccompanied means not in the residence with a custodial parent. You know, 226,000+ with limited English proficiency, 266,000+ with disabilities. So you can see our subgroups represent a huge amount of kids representative of our total homeless youth across the nation. So some of the common causes that we see, economic challenges. This is probably the highest one that we've seen. Loss of job due to COVID. Underemployment, not earning a fair wage job is also you may be employed, but it's really an underpaying position. Single parent homes where there's a divorce or a fracture, the loss of a parent in a home. That's what we saw a huge amount of, truthfully, at the beginning of this year. Disabilities, healthcare, substance abuse. Many of the children we work with who are homeless in the district have one or both parents who are experiencing addiction, who are unemployed or underemployed, who have unstable housing, living in different locations with their children and/or sometimes in automobiles and things like that. Domestic violence. I can say that's not one that is really, we don't see that a whole lot. It usually is representative of those first two examples, but certainly happens statistically. So some of the causes also, abuse and neglect, both of children and of spouses, conflict, gender, as I said, gender identity seems to be a reason for a lot of our unaccompanied youth. When kids are attempting to establish their identities that doesn't conform to the identities held or the values held in that home, the parents ask them to leave, and or the children leave because they're not willing to sort of live peaceably under that economic, the other thing that we see is shelter policies. Under COVID, some of our families who were living in shelters, those weren't available to them because of COVID. And so they double up in the home of another person or another friend, or they send their children to live in the home of somebody else, which is very, very common. We don't have shelters in the district, and so I'm going to skip this over. Some of our larger urban environments have shelters that a lot of your families, I would suspect in Allentown, you experience a lot of shelter homes. There is a relative stigma around living in a shelter. We will refer families to them because transportation is provided once you become homeless. We are obligated by law to transport children who are experiencing homelessness. And they're usually, quite far. There are some other homes in the area. So honestly, what we see here is shared housing arrangements, which we call doubling up. When a family or children go in and live with someone else gratis. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. People think that homelessness is living on the street in a cardboard box. I mean, honestly, you get this image, this mental image in your head about children experience or families experience homelessness. It doesn't look anything like that. It looks like this. You are considered homeless if you are in transitional housing or shelter, if you live in a hotel or a motel, a car, an abandoned building, a friend or relative's house. Any of those make you homeless. If you do not have fixed, stable, and adequate housing, then you are considered homeless. So, like I said, much of what we see is on the flank sides of the car. So, like I said, fixed, stable, and adequate is the bar in terms of eligibility. It is a difficult question, right? So if I go and live with Carol for 4 years because it's my choice, it is fixed, stable, and adequate. It's just not mine. So sometimes once residency becomes long-term, then that may change the debt. You may not be deemed homeless at that point. But truthfully, once you've lost housing at any point, you are homeless until you are considered not homeless. And so there are just more lists. Living in any emergency. Sadly, we had some natural disasters here at the onset of the year that several of our families, we've had fires, we've had floods, and we've had like pest infant stations. Those are all reasons that the people move into hotels and motels, which makes you homeless. So unaccompanied youth is a totally different ballgame. It's a very difficult conversation to have, but essentially you are not in the physical custody of your custodial parent. So examples being custodial parent, their new spouse, those people divorce, you living with the spouse that was not your custodial parent makes you homeless, unaccompanied, even though it's by choice. So there are some nuances that are interesting that we have to work through. So unaccompanied does not necessarily mean that you are homeless. It means you're unaccompanied until you don't have fixed, stable, and adequate nighttime housing. So you can be unaccompanied and not homeless. It's a little, so this is sort of the scenarios, an example. So you're homeless. If I don't have fixed, stable, and adequate housing, plus being unaccompanied, then I'm an unaccompanied homeless youth. Then you get served under McKinney-Vento. There you go. So they don't meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless, but they're unaccompanied. Then you're just unaccompanied and not homeless. You're not eligible for the services and provisions under McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento guarantees you transportation, free and reduced lunch, and a plethora of student services. Counseling, clothing. We're required federally to hold that funding for those populations. Reading support is a huge one for our elementary homeless population. So who determines eligibility? Used to be a very talented social worker. Now it's just me. So I have the authority to make those decisions. Much of it is done in consultation, like I said, with Carol, with every district in all the counties have homeless liaisons, generally who are social workers, plus there are regional liaisons. We work with Bucks County. However, there are Berks County, Lehigh County liaisons. And some of our kids will move up to Easton with family, and because they lost their home. We have to provide transportation. We have a conversation about what's in the best interest of that child, and then if we believe it's remaining in the district to get their education, we split transportation. Everything is case by case. I can tell you right now, one size does not fit all. It is very unique. Sometimes it is very convoluted and confusing, especially with unaccompanied youth. And so that has been a challenge, especially when we were virtual. Where you were laying your head at night is hard to determine when we don't see you all day. So those are the kinds of situations that we experience in terms of McKinney-Vento. It is, as I said, it has doubled. The conversations generally are very difficult ones because the kids have needs that far exceed just transportation. And this is different than foster. We cannot deny registration or enrollment of any child who falls under McKinney-Vento or who falls under the Foster Act. So we must register them. We register them without any prevention. We don't ask for records. We don't do anything because we know how fragile their time is and we have to get them into school. And that is sort of the really quick and brief, succinct version. So what happens is once you're deemed eligible, you're eligible for that whole school year. Every summer, I send out recertification to families who were eligible, asking if their housing situation has changed, asking you know, if they could provide us with residents. Some parents don't. And so I have to recertify their homelessness and report it. I'm report it quarterly, but then at the end of the year, it gets reported for the year. And so, like I said, doubled. And that doesn't include the kids who are homeless from other districts who are living here. So I'm just talking about our family members who went homeless from the district of origin, which is us. We might be the district of residence for other school districts because in Saturton they lost their home and they're living with a family member in East Greenville. They account for that homeless student. We just provide transportation. So the list is exhaustive. I mean, Jen Malone is a rock star beyond a rock star because honestly, the hardest job outside of making the determination is figuring out how we're going to get them where they need to go. And so I can answer any questions.
So you said, so if we have a family that moves in here, but they were originally from Saturton, they're deemed to be homeless, but we don't provide the services to them. We work with Saturton and transport them back to Saturton.
Yep. We split, so we share transportation. And so that family is guaranteed continued enrollment
In Saturton.
in Saturton. And so what Jen does is she hooks up with their transportation director and figures out how we're going to get the child from Upper Perk to Saturton.
But if that family wanted to enroll in Upper Perk, do they qualify to enroll in Upper Perk?
So if Saturton deems them homeless,
Right.
then I have to treat them as homeless under McKinney-Vento.
But they don't know the question. So
They decide.
what if they wanted to, okay, so they moved
Sure.
in, you know, so mom and her 3 kids moves in with her best friend.
Yep.
For a couple months because of domestic violence.
Yep.
Let's say. So they move from Saturton to here. She can choose to remain, her kids to remain at Saturton,
Yep.
and we would bus them there.
Yep.
But what if she wanted them to go to Upper Perk?
So she would sign a multiple occupancy. The owner of that residence, who is a tax-paying member of Upper Perk, could sign a multiple occupancy, which is signifying that there are 2 families residing under one roof. Then they come to Upper Perk.
And Saturton would then be free
Saturton-
of all of their obligations?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
So,
I understand.
and then in some cases, unaccompanied youth who don't have a custodial parent caring for them, there are other members of our community or other communities who say, I will take care of that child. That child can live with me. And that's the provision of 1302, which means that you are getting no benefit, nobody's paying you, you are taking responsibility of guardianship and oversight of a minor child without a parent. And so that process requires them to have sign-offs from the parents, gets notarized, they submit it to us, then that child also remains in the district.
So it's a best interest determination. So they call them bid meetings.
Bid meetings.
Every time
Yeah.
it comes up, there's a meeting between school districts to figure out what's the best place.
That's interest determination.
Yeah, it's a bid meeting. And I will say that the amount that this team is doing without a social worker it's tremendous. That's a lot. I did it in my last role at Springford with someone else, and she carried the bulk of it. So to be doing this, it's with that many homeless folks. And didn't we have some at the beginning of the year with weather? Some people were displaced because
Yes.
of weather.
Yeah, it was not a
because
good
of the
year.
flooding that happened.
Yeah.
So even have some of that transient stuff happening, and that can cause a bubble, and just a heck of a lot of time and sadness. It's such a sad circumstance to deal with, as much as you guys do.
And we were notified a week and a half ago that we are having our homeless foster audit.
Oh,
Yeah.
how timely.
Yeah. Well, they wanted to make it March 3rd, but they told me February. it was like 2.5 weeks from when they notified me. I'm like, listen to me. No. So it's in May. It's in May. It's in May. So they gave me some grace in that. And so I'm working through pulling all the stuff together for that. But, you know, it's real. It's very real in the district, and you know, our counselors do a great job working with those kids, because generally there's a lot of stuff involved in that. Sadly, there's a stigma because people have an image of homelessness, but it's really all of those things. So.
Yeah, I have to say, I usually think of homeless children and students as being an issue in cities. You don't think of areas like Upper Perk. So like I said, last meeting, when you mentioned the significant increase, I was like, wow. You know, like I don't think of homelessness really here that much.
Yeah, and truthfully, you know, even living in you may have a home, but it's not adequate. It's lacking water, it's lacking heat. We have those situations. And so it is not adequate. Thus, even though it's where you lay your head at night, you're still homeless. And you get services through the district, through community organizations, so.
Mr. Bricker, any questions?
I just had one. I think I heard you say that check-in, it's a yearly thing, so if beginning of the year you qualify for the McKinney-Vento, you're covered for the whole year.
Yeah.
But if, you know, your situation improves in middle of the year, you said you just check in with them once a year.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, once you have been deemed homeless, it's the whole year in terms of how we report you. But we've had families who've experienced natural disasters, fires, floods, who moved to a hotel and then got their home fixed and purchased, and then they moved back in.
Right.
So we exit them.
Okay.
We exit them, and then I report them at the end of the year that they were able to exit.
Okay.
You know, so I have to do an entry and a withdrawal date for every child. So in those circumstances, they come out. I tell them the date that they secured per housing, but they're still eligible for services the entire school year.
Mr. Hemser?
I was going to just ask, on a percentage basis, do you think it's more families being uprooted, or it's kids getting kicked out of the house or leaving the house?
I mean, honestly, I feel like it's mostly economic downturn. I think that represented a ton of the cases that we had with families moving in with relatives. Of late, because these come all year, we've seen a lot of children who are in such a conflict in their homes that they are either not welcome there or don't feel safe to stay there. And so they move. And they jump around to house after house until somebody says, no, you can stay here. And once we find out, sometimes that happens, and we don't even find out right away.
That's gotta be a
And so then we're like, wait a minute, you know, how long has that been? And then we're trying to call the people we know who actually have responsibility, and they're like, nope, haven't seen them in a month. You know, and so that of late, right now, the whole unaccompanied youth is really kicking up.
And just to add to what she's saying, that piece on this end of trying to go here, there, who, like, it's so much research you have to try and do. Like, am I speaking to the right person? Am I speaking to the right school district? I mean,
right, we were on a phone call today, and there were 3 different school districts, and none of us could figure out what was happening. So, it's quite something. But
I do actually have a couple of questions. My head is spinning because I work for a company that could provide employment, and possibly housing on a limited basis for a temporary situation. So my head is spinning. Just a couple questions. Just if you can say, how many families would you say are covered under this plan? Just a
Families or students?
families.
It's probably just at our district of origin.
Yes.
I mean, we're probably upwards of 50.
Okay. All right.
That's not kids.
Right,
That's families.
So like
With
you may
multiple
have,
children.
you may have a family with 2 to 3 kids in one family. Yeah, that's what I'm asking for. Okay. And then transportation, like for the kids could go outside the district if you feel that it's in the best interest of the child to keep them here at Upper Perk.
Yeah.
But to go outside the district to pick them up, to get them to school.
Yes, we have to.
Okay, all right.
So, and that 50 number is not our foster population.
Okay,
That's just homeless.
okay.
Is there, I'm sorry, I have another question. Is there a limit as to how far we have to
So,
like, they can't move to Wilkes-Barre, right?
well,
And-
so, I mean, believe it or not,
Or they could?
that's what that best interest conversation is about. It is not healthy for children to be on the bus
Right.
for 90 minutes one way. So usually when transportation prohibits it, it becomes they go to the district of residence out of the district of origin. What we see the most truthfully is sort of Pottstown, Boyertown, Souderton, Quakertown, Penridge, some Allentown.
But it's reasonable.
And then some of our kids who are homeless are in placements. So they may have moved here, and now we're trying to get them all the way down to Norristown. You know, they moved even more north, and we're like, oh. So, yeah,
But there isn't a set, it's like you said,
Right.
case by case.
correct.
Okay.
And you are legally bound to transport. So if we don't have school buses, we try and find contractors to, get a car.
Yeah, I mean, we're just on the outside, like by a mile, beyond the district limits.
Yeah.
So we're not far.
That was really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And enlightening, 50 families, wow. It was even worse than I thought. We are over our time, so if we don't have any further questions for our team here, we are going to let them go home.
In the rain, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yes, so our next meeting is March 17th, so everybody wear green.
Yep.
Because it's St. Patrick's Day. Sorry, the hour for the meeting. March 17th, we can't possibly have a meeting on March 17th. Guess we are. So we will have our next meeting on March 17th. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
And hopefully Mike will be back with us next month. Thank you guys for your work. Dr. Rena, I need to show you something real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if I could just talk to you.